As the 2024 presidential election heats up, we have to look at Kamala Harris's best case scenario. What is up, people of the internet? It is me, Real American, back again with a new video, and today we have to talk about the 2024 presidential election because many people are asking the same question. What is the best case scenario for Kamala Harris? Yeah, that's right. We're going to go over what I personally believe is the best case scenario for Harris. Now, I want to be clear about one thing. This is not an official prediction. I still think at the end of the day, Donald Trump's going to win the presidency. Now, that could change, obviously, but as of now, I still think he's the favorite. But I still want to go over what I believe to be the best case scenario for Kamala Harris, because a lot of people are asking a very good question as to what is the ceiling for Kamala Harris, because there is one for her. Some people make it sound like that she can win 48 states. She's going to win in a landslide that we haven't seen since 1984. That's not going to happen. Even in a best case scenario for Harris, with the stars aligned, everything went perfectly, there's no way in hell she could win like 49 states. That's not going to happen. Some people actually believe that, but you're delusional if you actually believe, oh yeah, by some miracle, Kamala Harris is going to win 48 states. She's going to win every single county. She's going to win like 80% of the vote. That's not going to happen whatsoever. And that's the first thing I want to touch upon real quick before we start. People got to understand that Trump has a floor. Say what you will about Trump, he has a floor of like 46%. No matter what you do, he is getting 46 to 47% of the vote, no matter what. Look at this. The current polls have him at 47%. In 2020, he got just under 47% of the vote. So with this being the best polling for Harris, and quite frankly, this has not changed that much in over a month. Like, for a little bit there, Trump was at, 48%, but even beforehand, he was consistently at, 47%, 45, 46%. He's never been at 30%. He's always at 45, 46, 47%. That's the biggest problem for Harris, by the way, for a best case scenario. Trump has such a high floor that her best case scenario really isn't that impressive when you compare it to, say, Trump's, where you could argue his best case scenario is flipping deep or bluish states like Virginia, like Minnesota. As for Harris, well, you'll see. So let us start with the safe states. And that's, of course, states like Utah, Idaho, Wyoming. These states, they might get closer, but they're not going to vote for Harris whatsoever. The Deep South, you could see a state like Mississippi maybe in a weird scenario. It could be within 10, I guess. But I find that so unlikely that I'm just going to say it's safe Republican. Again, Trump's biggest strength is he has such a high floor that even in a worst case scenario for him, he's not going to lose states like Mississippi. He's going to win a state like Tennessee, Missouri, Kentucky, West Virginia, Indiana. These are the states that no matter what you argue, they're going to vote for Trump no matter what. If you really believe Indiana's going to flip in a best case scenario for Harris, you're delusional. Like, it hasn't happened since 2008. And that was when McCain got absolutely crushed. He lost by, 8 points? Which I guess is possible for Trump, but even then, an 8-point loss does not translate to Indiana flipping. Now, as for Harris, in this scenario, she would, of course, win the West Coast, Colorado, New Mexico, Illinois, Maryland, D.C., Virginia, all the states that you would think would vote Democrat. These states would all be safe Democrat, no matter what. And you would include a state like New Hampshire, because if Trump's doing just even a couple points worse, you would expect New Hampshire to be safe Democrat at that point. Again, I'm not saying it's a guarantee, but if it's a worst case scenario for Trump, I highly doubt that he could win New Hampshire, just for the simple fact that the demographics of New Hampshire are not friendly to Trump whatsoever. Like, you would expect a 90% white state to be favorable for him. The problem is you have a bunch of people from Boston moving into New Hampshire, and well, they're taking their voting habits with them. So right off the bat, Kamala Harris would have 225 electoral votes. Donald Trump would have 113. Yeah, that's it for Trump. Now, there are a couple other states that would be likely Republican, such as Alaska, such as South Carolina, Ohio, and Iowa. Now, with Iowa and Ohio, they're trending Republican, and even in a worst case scenario, I just don't see how Harris could win those states. Like, it could be closer, like maybe Trump's winning Ohio by like 6 or whatever, but I don't see how an 8-point shift occurs in Ohio or even in Iowa. I mean, it's not going to happen. Is it possible? I guess. But it's so unlikely that even in a worst case scenario, Trump is probably winning Iowa and Ohio by like 6 to 7 points. Now, South Carolina and Alaska, you could see a decent shift towards Harris in a best case scenario, but the delusions of Alaska flipping Democrat, it's not going to happen. Like, I know Mary Patola is a strong Democrat. I get that, but that's because Alaska has a stupid election system. That's why she won. That doesn't translate to Kamala Harris. She could do better in the state, but to say that she's going to flip the state of Alaska, I don't think so. I don't think it's really possible for Harris as of now. Could it change? Maybe. Now, there is one more electoral vote for Harris that's, I would consider safe as well. That's Nebraska 2nd. I forgot to mention that. At that point, Trump's losing Nebraska 2nd by 10 points. I don't see how in a worst case scenario, Trump would somehow win Nebraska 2nd. So right off the bat, you could tell, yeah, Trump is a big problem. In a worst case scenario, he's only at 148 electoral votes that are either safe or likely. Well, Harris, she has to win just a couple states and she's the next president. And right off the bat, you can knock off Michigan. And that seems kind of obvious because, well, back in 2020, Michigan voted for Biden by just under 3 points. Now, you have the issue with the Muslim vote. I get that. Like, that could be a big problem for Harris. But let's just assume that by some miracle, she's able to bring back the Muslim and progressive vote in Michigan. In this scenario, it's not crazy to see Kamala Harris winning Michigan by 5 in an absolutely best case scenario. Now, she's not going to win it by 12 points or whatever, like some people claim, but a 5-point victory in a best case scenario, I can see that happening. It's not likely, but if we're talking about a best case scenario, a 2 to 3 point shift from 2020, it's not that crazy at all. As for Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, I think they would both be likely. Maybe they could be teetering on likely. But I just think demographically, Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, they still are pretty good for Trump, demographically speaking. While Michigan is a bit more friendly for Harris, at least on paper. So that's why I think Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, they would have a shift to the left, but I don't think it would be a 15-point shift. I think it would be, 2 to 3 points, maybe. But the problem is Trump has such a high floor in these states that can he really do any worse in a place like Wisconsin, in a place like Pennsylvania? That's the problem for Harris. Like I said, she has a very low ceiling just because of Trump having such a high floor. Trump's not going to lose that many voters. And he might lose some, but it's not going to be enough to make Wisconsin safe Democrat or even be enough to flip a state like Ohio. As for Maine 2nd, Trump would probably hold on to it. It would be closer, but he probably wins Maine 2nd by a couple points. And I would assume that Florida, even in a worst case scenario for Trump, it would be closer. But I just think the trends in Florida are so good for Trump that even in a best case scenario for Harris, I don't see how he loses Florida. It could flip. I'm not denying that, but demographically speaking, and even politically speaking, Florida is a Republican state now. It just is. Do people really think Florida's going to magically shift Democrat in 2024? I don't think so. Even if she does 2 points better in Florida, which is not going to happen, Trump would still win the state. Plus, we're not even factoring in, oh yeah, by the way, Republicans have gained, I think, a net gain of 1.5 million voters since 2020 or something crazy like that. Yeah, it's like 1 million voters. So you're telling me that despite the Republican Party have a net gain of like 1.2 million voters in Florida, by some miracle, they're going to lose the state now? I don't think so. I just highly doubt, even in a best case scenario, we would see Florida flip. It could be closer, but again, Trump has a high floor in these states. And that's why, yeah, Harris might be doing better, margin-wise in Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, but Trump has a high enough floor where he would not lose a state like Florida. And even Texas, yes, I would argue in a best case scenario, it would be very close. But I think Trump would hold on to Texas by, like, a point. And there's many reasons for that, but yet again, like with Florida, in 2022, there were some indications that, hey, maybe Democrats have reached some kind of ceiling in Texas. Even back in 2020, there were signs of it. And we just got to see what happens with the Hispanic vote. But even if Trump does worse across the board, if the Hispanic vote is really shifting like 10 to 15 points Republican, Harris can't win Texas at that point. She needs to win the Hispanic vote by quite a bit to even compete in the state. So I think I'm being generous to her to say, yeah, in a best case scenario, Trump would barely win it, but he would still hold on to it by, like a 0.5% or even a point or so. Now, there are 4 other states remaining, and I would just say all 4 of them would probably be likely Democrat, or lean, I should say. All 4 of them would lean to the left if this was a best case scenario. Yet again, you have to look at the facts that with these states, you have good voter registration data in North Carolina, in Nevada, even in Arizona. Republicans are gaining a shitload of voters, but I still have some big questions about Arizona. Even in my actual predictions, I still have little to no faith in Arizona because, demographically speaking, it's not a friendly state to Trump. It's just not. And you could argue even Georgia is that to a lesser extent, but it seems like even Georgia, there are signs that Republicans are improving there. But in a best case scenario, I would assume that Harris, she wins Nevada, she wins Arizona, she wins Georgia, and she flips North Carolina. So funny enough, in a best case scenario, I think the only flip would come in North Carolina. I know that sounds crazy, like, oh, best case scenario, that should be a blue wave. But like I mentioned, we're talking about Donald Trump. It's not like with a best case scenario for Trump where Biden was outright collapsing everywhere. He's doing 5 to 10 points worse across the board. Every data point indicates he's going to get crushed. It's over. The thing with Trump is he has a high floor. Even in the quote-unquote polling surge for Harris, it has Trump at 47% right now. 47%. In 2020, he got 47% of the vote. So even with Harris having a surge, Trump is still at roughly 47%. And if Trump maintains that, if he's getting 46, 47% of the vote, yeah, maybe North Carolina flips in states like Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and the Sunbelt states, they may get more Democrat. But a state like Texas or Florida, yeah, Texas might be trending Democrat, but Trump still won it by over 5 points in 2020. And it may shift Democrat yet again, but it seems like he has such a high enough floor in Texas, in Ohio, in Iowa, even in Florida, that he's not going to lose any other state except for North Carolina. That's just my opinion. You could argue, well, maybe he could lose Texas or Florida in an absolutely best case scenario, which I still think Florida's going to go Trump no matter what. But fine, you could argue that. But to say that Trump is going to only get 42%, that's crazy. And we're not even talking about Jill Stein or Cornel West being on the ballot. So a best case scenario for Harris, yeah, she would win all the swing states by a good margin, but does that really translate to flipping Texas if Trump still has a very high floor? I don't think so. You can make the argument otherwise, I get it, but just logically speaking, Trump has a high enough floor where outside of North Carolina, do you really think he's going to lose South Carolina, Ohio, Iowa? I don't think so. Anyways, folks, thank you so much for watching. If you guys did enjoy this video, smash the like button down below, subscribe, share with your friends, hit that little bell, follow the social media accounts in the description down below, and of course, join the channel today. Godspeed. to all of you.